Joan Blair, Center for Biologics, FDA. There was a thread that came up in the breakout that I was participating in, and I don't recall that it was said here, so I thought I'd just voice it for the larger group. I think we need to recognize the challenge in terms of harmonization that the goal of regulators, regulatory convergence, can meet its public health protection goal that may not meet industry's need for very practical, mechanical process fixes, which is truly harmonization. So I think there are two different challenges and they have two different needs. So I think we need to keep that in mind as we think about solutions.
Great point, Joan. Mike.
So, and I'm just looking at a note
just
here.
Just introduce yourself forward there.
Yes, sorry. Mike Ward, Health Canada. I've got a regulatory joke. Okay. And it's actually sent in from Justina Molson, Seiter, FDA. And it is, where can you find a turtle without legs? Exactly where you left it. And here, referring to the fact that for something to move forward, that you have to leverage work with other initiatives, the harmonization initiatives. Efficiencies of programs don't duplicate efforts of others, and define goals and agreed upon action items, and sustainability needs structures and secretariat to formalize effort and provide continuity. So maybe we could say we did find at least one regulatory joke. Thank you.
Do any of the panelists want to comment on either of those points? The poor turtle, legless turtle who needs so many things to walk, and some of the other point that Joan raised in terms of looking at different models of trying to improve the compatibility of regulatory systems and what objectives they achieve.
I think what Joan was actually saying is that go for harmonization, but there is a limit to how far you can go. I think that was the key point, and I think that's a good point. And I think that's beyond our session of yesterday. But I mean, what came out yesterday is that then what can you do? Then, and of course, collect information and share the information and present it in a clear way. And what we discussed yesterday about managing risk, benefit analysis, etc. Do it in a standardized way. Everybody can see what you use, what you assume, what your conclusion is, and anybody can follow it and stop following it where the situation changes. So that pleads for real standardized, let me say, submission of information and sort of standardized way of presenting it, but at a certain moment leaving it to the final decision in each of the regulatory situations, which can be different in the final stage of the decision-making process. Thank you.
I think that's a powerful vision. Andreas?
Yeah. To John's point, I think we need to maybe take this a bit broader to include other stakeholders that are more representative of our, public health clients, the general population. I don't see the general population represented here. And this is a good thought, actually. The public health aspect and what the industry needs, both are justified. They might not always be totally aligned. Sometimes, you may need a process of clarifying, going through the dilemma and deciding on which side you come out. It all boils down to agreeing on metrics, how we, from different stakeholder perspective, measure performance of regulatory agencies. This hasn't been done yet. Some groups like CRS and so are working on it, but I haven't seen this yet as a topic for convergence or harmonization. I think that may be a work stream we should take forward.
I will point out in defense of the forum and the Institute of Medicine that the meeting is definitely open to the public and publicly posted. Why general members of the public wouldn't want to come to a meeting on international regulatory harmonization may be a different question.
There's not enough jokes.
Yeah, and I think Joan's comment also points out the importance of what I think Ray said in our session was the importance of working from the bottom up as well as from the top down. And so we have to hear the voices from those who are actually doing the work and are into the details, as well as just sitting up at the high levels and trying to make things work. And I think Margaret talked about this as well, as having hearing from the agencies in all of the developing countries that are going to have to be faced with developing new products. And if we give them, say, a lot of product standards, and they don't have a CMC group, and don't know how to, don't have the group to review CMC of what value is this. So you have to think about all the parts of the puzzle here.
Quick comment. Steve. I think just in response to Joan's point, I don't see a conflict because the drug development and regulation ecosystem is so big and so complex that there's enough room to do everything that we've been talking about as long as we prioritize it properly. So, there's some things that are easy to do that will appeal specifically to sponsors, and then there are other things that need to be done that are directly maybe in the interests of public health, and they don't have to exclude each other, just like they don't now, really. So I don't see it as a particular problem, except that we can't do everything at once, and we have to prioritize the activities.
Great. Then I'll move to questions. Doug?
Yeah, hi, Doug Throckmorton, FDA. I wanted to follow up, I guess, on Michael and some of the thread that's gone on about the people doing this work. So the last couple of days, we've had a lot of conversation about the process, the things that might be put in place to make things more efficient and harmonized. I haven't heard a systematic discussion of the people, the resources, if you will, available to be doing this. That might be something to discuss later on or at a future meeting or something, but it is critically important. If we're not building that infrastructure of willing partners, all the process in the world is probably not going to get you where you want to go.
Thanks, Doug. David.
David Wood, WHO. I'd just like to pick up on the point that Andreas made about the metrics for assessing national regulatory authorities. And I think that that's an area of interest that maybe we should follow up. The assessment tools that WHO use at the moment focus on systems. Are the systems in place for NRAs? And that's what we've been working on. It's been refined and is still being refined. But as we've moved forward with this tool, one of the issues we've been grappling with, well, how do we build in performance indicators into that tool? And as of yet, there's no good solution. How do we do that? And that's clearly, that's where we want to go. And I think it would be good to, maybe to stimulate some thinking around that, in terms of performance indicators as a sort of a next step for that type of assessment.
Mike.
So that's a good point, David. So one thing that comes to mind that from our experience with the AVREF, which is the African Vaccine Regulatory Forum that Lembit and David mentioned, is that, as a nonprofit, we're trying to bring together partners, pharmaceutical partners, to develop TB vaccines. And we got a couple that are quite far along. And we said, why don't we go to AVREF with these? And usually the first question they ask after what's AVREF is, will they save time in the whole regulatory process by using this group of African regulators together to discuss this? Does this actually shorten the time frames for regulatory? And I can't answer that. I don't know if you all can answer that, but I think it points to the importance of having an evaluation system that says this is what this has accomplished so far. So, for example, malaria vaccines has gone through this, meningococcal has gone through this, but I'm not sure there's a metric that says we actually saved this much time by going through this harmonization process.
Anyone else on metrics who will do and fund this work?
Just Well, I think the question is very valid, and of course, David can probably answer about the AVREF experience better. Was it really saving, summa summarum, the time? What I can say is that the joint review that we did with the Eastern African community regulators was actually saving the time. So the review time was shorter than the usual process review time. And some of the delays, which there was a couple of products involved in this initiative, they were delays that were actually on the side of the manufacturer not being able to meet some of the local requests of providing something to the regulator. So it was really a bad fortune, but for other products where this didn't happen, we calculated what was our, by the way, PQ average time, and then looked what was the country's average time if they had gone outside of the framework. And I think the conclusion was positive. It was cutting substantially time.
Great. That's promising to hear. James?
Just along the same lines, but perhaps more in the GMP area. For example, what we're seeing in the Americas through this kind of coordination, collaboration between 5 regulators in Latin America is that by sharing inspection reports and even inspection schedules, some of them are beginning to say, well, I don't need to go to your country because you're inspecting the same plants that I'm inspecting, so why duplicate? And they've begun to look at some of the analysis around savings in terms of cost, because obviously inspectors cost a lot of money. There's travel, there's time, there's actually the industry committing to do multiple inspections as well. But also in terms of the actual review processes, how this impacts the review. So we are actually seeing very positive economies coming out, both in terms of time and quality of the work as well.
Did anyone want to take on Doug's question about who and would do this work and funding? Any responses to that?
I mean, I think there's not one answer. I think that the regulatory agencies are all strapped, but could they increase the funding of harmonization activities by 5%, 10%? They probably could manage that. The nonprofit groups have a large, broad funding stream that is sort of project dependent, and it depends on what is being proposed to be done. So I don't think there's one funding stream. I think sponsor companies as well could step up to the plate. It isn't the responsibility of one party in this meeting. It's really everyone's responsibility. I do think that the economic assessment will show that it will save money, and therefore it shouldn't, I'm not saying it isn't, but it shouldn't be that much of a challenge to have modest resource increases in each of our sectors towards harmonization activities. Great.
Thank you. Natalie?
Yeah, thank you, Natalie Struve from the NTI. I'd like to share a few examples. One is the value of pre-qualification for an anti-malaria drug, which was after pre-qualification was registered in 28 African countries within 2 years, which is not the standard way you would expect this to happen. 2 is to mention what we did for sleeping sickness, which is totally neglected, because we are talking here about neglected diseases. And we went for scientific advice with the Article 58 WHO and FDA. And I think it's a very good example. If you're looking for business cases, I don't know, but we can give success stories. We have some of these. And I think it was a wonderful example of willingness of the agencies to try and bend a little bit what would be their expectations for a drug maybe in a larger market, where they understood that the benefit risk assessment was critical. And it was mentioned yesterday by a speaker in the morning that we have to think about the principles and not only about the rules. So I just want to share this with you because it helped us a lot. And the last thing I want to say is an example we did again for sleeping sickness, where we went for joint ethical review. Because we were operating in countries who do not have very strong ethics committees. So what we did is that we had a north-south ethical review, but also south-south meeting. So we brought together all the different expertise we could think of, those who are knowledgeable about the disease, those who are knowledgeable about the science, those who are knowledgeable about ethics in the countries. And by bringing all this, We met all the requirements for both a scientific and ethical review, and we maintained sovereignty, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce this well, because each country's representatives then went back to their own country ethics committee and had to review within their own institution. So it was not just having a central review, it was just sharing information. And I have to say that the countries in the north got a lot of new expertise, and knowledge sharing was in both directions. So I think there are ways to do things. The difficulty I can see is systematizing this, which clearly is difficult. And the other question I have here is the question of conflict of interest, because who pays for these reviews? If it's the sponsor, we have an issue. So that's it. Wanted to share this.
I think I saw David next, and then Hans George after.
Well, thanks. In fact, Natalie's actually made some of the points, because I was going to respond to the question that Mike asked about what is the impact. And I think that it's actually good to hear from, not just WHO, not sort of the authorities, but, some of the sponsors of products. And I think that voice and that experience would be good to actually encourage a little bit more feedback. It appears to us that it works, that you get quicker outcomes, but I mean, it'd be good to hear from the industry and sponsors. How do they perceive it? So, I think I would encourage some more feedback, like we just heard from Natalie.
Great, Hans George.
Hans Georg, European Medicines Agency. I want to come back to that question of, if you have some kind of joint review, harmonization, would you save time in the process? And my question is, why would you expect that in the first place? Here is a complex system where many sit around the table. Why would they be faster than one individual player? No, speaking from the European experience, what you can get is something totally different. You have many people around the table. Few will drive the decision, and Lambert spoke to that, and it's not a secret, it's on our website. You will immediately see that there are a few member states who drive all the decisions, but everybody else sits around, and what you get is the buy-in also from these people. So you save by avoiding replication. You don't save in the time of the process.
Great. Thanks, Hans George. Vincent?
Vincent Tahonkai from Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Two comments. One is actually to add to the issue of saving time or not saving time. I come from a slightly different perspective than the comment that was just made, in saying that, in fact, there is room to save time. It depends on the circumstance. In the case of, for example, Aeras, where it would require obtaining authorization from 19 plus different countries, typically sequentially, it really gets you a lot of time saving if you bring those 19 countries together, and you can expedite their decision-making process, even though individually. So that's one perspective to look at. My second comment is really in relation to the metrics. Building a widget is what we are all about when we're getting good at that. How can we measure the impact of what we've built? If we don't have anybody use it, we will not be in a position to review the cycle time and develop any metrics. If we don't have partners in industry align themselves and commit to trying out these systems, then we will not have the opportunity to really see whether they're working or not. So my plea is that we get some encouragement from the sponsors and manufacturers to give a chance to study these initiatives and see if it makes sense for them, because if you don't come to try them, there will be no basis for determining whether they are working or not.
Great. I want to pause there and take some reactions from the panel. Mike.
I think that's exactly the point. Vincent, I think I'm very supportive of the ABREF, and I think you know the ability of it as a capacity building learning experience, and it is a tremendous value. I think the issue is getting industry, making the arguments with industry that it's worthwhile trying these, and being risk averse sometimes. They don't want to jump into something new where they don't understand the impact. So that's exactly it. We have to show them that this works through examples like Natalie talked about and things like this. I think that's what's of value.
I mean, everyone knows the medical product industry is very diverse, but I do feel that there's enough of an interest in this that you know, the industry can organize itself to take advantage of any opportunities that are out there and try to establish a best case scenario for seeing whether something will work and then trying to disseminate it. So I think it's getting to the right people and getting the launch discussions, and I know many of the industry people here would be very willing to work on that.
Yeah, I want to be a little more specific in this regard, because my feeling is that many of the industry people that sit in a forum like this, they come from the group of the converted. So those who already know that this is good and who are very happy and understanding why regulation is important and want to move this forward. But those who travel with your trade delegation across the ocean to influence the discussions that go on in free trade agreements, they usually have a lawyer's background, and they have been for 20 years in a lobbyist position, and they haven't heard yet these discussions. They are still in their mindset 10, 20 years back, and I know some of them, you know, from face-to-face exchange, and sometimes surprised, you work for the same company like this other person that I met at another meeting? Yeah? So you have to do a little bit more work internally to get this message across that good regulation is good for business, and that it's worth investing in regulation in countries that have weak regulation, as you're growing, as you have to basically harvest your growth rates in far-merging markets, and you can't get them in Europe and the US anymore. So there's some homework to do on your side as well, so that you lobby for the right cause, and because your lobbying is very powerful.
Very good point. I don't know if there are any other industry folks here who want to comment on it, but I think that's a very valid concern and valid point. Okay, please.
Thank you. Tim Franson from Faegre BD and USP. What I'd heard in your comments, and what this would lead to, is two questions for the panel. First, regarding general harmonization themes, non-disease specific, there hasn't seemed to be any hue and cry for we need more quality guidelines, more safety, et cetera, beyond the core of what's in ICH. That is, that perhaps there could be better information sharing beyond ICH regions, perhaps better implementation across all countries, but not a huge gap in what exists, accepting perhaps this notion of benefit risk. So the question would be, is benefit risk, as the final scales of justice, regulatory justice, if you will, in product decisions, an appropriate vehicle for better communication across regions, and a better way to communicate to ultimate stakeholders in practice and patient communities? So that would be on the non-disease specific side. And the second point on the opposite, there were some discussions, at least in one of the breakouts, about can one harmonize disease-specific entities, or are the differences in practice and the acceptance of certain endpoints across regions such that that is not the next great frontier and should be avoided or delegated to other stakeholders? So is benefit risk the leverage point, and can disease-specific entities be harmonized?
I think my opinion on that is yes for both. Benefit risk has a lot of things going on at the moment. I'm not sure it's ripe right now, but I think it will be within the next few years. And then on the disease-specific guidance, we've already heard that's worked for some of the neglected or tropical diseases. I don't see why it can't work if the regulators are willing to make the effort to make it work. I've used the example of that a lot of the companies are developing drugs for osteoporosis. There's an osteoporosis guidance in the EU. There isn't one in the US. And I'm sure there are plenty of opportunities on either side, and other examples just happen to seize on that one. But it's a matter of will, and I know it's a matter of resources. The thinking isn't that far apart in many disease areas that it wouldn't be possible.
That probably raises another, I think, priority that has been raised here, but probably not mentioned in this final session, is some of the gaps. I think the medical device area, I think we highlighted yesterday, was a key area that not only in harmonization, but really in QSE area. And the blood products, those mentioned by David. So I think it would be amiss of us not to highlight those areas, recognize the enormous advances that have been made in medicines and vaccines, and call to attention perhaps some of the other product categories that need to move in the same direction.
We just have a couple of minutes left, so I want to make sure we get.
I have one comment and one question. I think Steve was, Raymond from HSA. I think Steve was mentioning about getting slightly more resources for harmonization efforts. But I think in terms of, there might be a paradox here, because what happens is, I think at the end of it, when the senior management or the heads know that we are going to go towards harmonization, they might actually trim down our resources, because they might say that with harmonization, actually you don't need to have so many resources to do so much things anymore. So there might be a paradox, as in with harmonization, manpower requirements might actually go down instead of going up. I think the other question, the question that I have is, I think we have mentioned a lot about core principles and case examples, good case examples here. Which do you think would be a good information exchange IT platform or media or a journal kind of platform for us to share some of this that have been brought up during this event? Thanks.
I mean, we would be, as BAHO, we would be willing to share with you the initiative that has been developed in the region, and which the number of regulators are participating in at the moment, which is the Platform in Access and Innovation for Health Technologies, which was jointly developed with the US FDA and with the government of Brazil. So that could be something that we could explore further with WHO at the global level, and look in at some of the SharePoints, et cetera, that exist there. I know there's a lot of interest at the moment from regulators within the region looking at possibilities for sharing GMP inspection reports now through the platform. So this is something that I think we need to take on and explore a little bit further with regulators in the region and outside.
Yeah, I think there are lots of different opportunities that could be platforms for information sharing, and I'm not sure I'm the best person to ask, but there are a number of them out there. And that's something that a small group could look at. Are there one or two of these platforms that would be good to focus on to help regulators and others around the world know about the harmonization activities that are going on?
Great, and with that, we're out of time in this session. I hope you'll join me in thanking our panelists.
Okay, we're in our home stretch. I'd like to ask the next three speakers to come up to the table. And while they're coming up, I'll just say we've got a fantastic concluding panel. One representative of a sponsor company, one representative from the European regulatory body, the EMA, and a deputy commissioner auditor from the US FDA. So I'm really pleased that we're able to get this level of person for our concluding session, but equally important is that you all keep your energy through, so for the last half an hour or so that we've got for you all to participate, that you've got some concluding comments, because I think we've got a lot of people in this audience who are extremely thoughtful and have a lot of creative ideas, and I want to make sure before we end at 2:45, our writer has got all of those great ideas down as well for the summary. So thank you. Starting out, again, Deb Otter from the US FDA. Thanks, Deb, for being here.